This is not like 30 years ago. There are natural constraints on supply that make today's logistics world very different than yesterday's.
It really requires innovation across almost every aspect. Essentially, the entire supply chain is required to modify to meet the objectives.
The number one reason that many companies fail is they miss market transitions. Are you going to be a disruptor or a victim of disruption?
Times like today spawn innovation and opportunity.
E-commerce really turbocharged it. This is not something where you can flip a switch and change it the next day. This takes years and years.
Well, welcome. Nice to see a nice full room. Thank you so much. So great to see you again, Hamid. And Dave, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about the current and future state of the supply chain. And let me just start with you. You know, this is a topic that every CEO has on his agenda, and anybody who's waiting for a refrigerator to be delivered. So it's gone very mainstream. How bad would you say is the supply chain right now, Dave?
Well, I think the patient's in recovery at the moment. You know, it's been a long few years for the supply chain, lots of delays, you know, every issue imaginable almost, it seems like, in the last 24 to 36 months. But when you look at what's happening with the freight markets, and costs are starting to plummet as capacity is freeing up, I think we still have some shortages, but I think you look at mid-23, I think you start to see much of the supply chain begin to normalize.
Do you agree with that, Hamid? I mean, what are you seeing from your business?
Yeah, I think a lot of the constraints on the pipes that are connecting different areas of the world are being relieved, but I do think there are going to be two constraints that will continue. One is labor. There's a real shortage of labor, and that sort of raises havoc with the supply chain. And the second thing is actually a place to put all the inventory, because people are carrying more inventory to be able to deal with the resilience issue, and we're running out of places to put it.
Do you agree with what Dave is saying in terms of the timeline? I mean, when are we going to stop saying we have a supply chain crisis?
Yeah, I do agree with Dave, and you asked me this question last year and about this time, and everybody was saying 2022, once we make it through Christmas season, we're going to be okay. And I think I was pretty clear that we were not going to be okay. So I don't think we'll ever stop talking about the supply chain, because it's now top of mind for most executives, but I think it will no longer be acute like it is today.
Well, I mean,
everybody in supply chain knows that the supply chain has problems. Like if you work in supply chain, every day is some new challenge. It has been
gotten
extraordinarily,
a lot worse.
It's blown up in an unprecedented way the last few years.
So a lot of people suggest that maybe the way forward on all of this is that the supply chain should be less global and more local, sort of a de-globalization. What do you guys think about that? Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think there's a lot of talk about deglobalization, but if you actually look at where things are being manufactured, maybe they're not being manufactured as much in China. Maybe most people have China plus one manufacturing, meaning that there's some other place in Asia that they're manufacturing it. Or they're manufacturing it in north of Mexico. But we don't have the capacity as much as we'd like to manufacture things here and onshore. So if you look at the numbers, those trade deficit numbers are increasing all the time. And so I don't think we're getting into a deglobalized world. We may be getting into spheres of globalization, so that you have this sort of European sphere, and you have the Chinese, maybe Russian sphere. But that's above my pay grade. I'm not sure how that's going to work out.
So would you make a case for globalization, just this is the way it's going to be?
I think so. I mean, globalization, I think, is one of the greatest things that's happened to humanity. If you look at the invention of the shipping container and the movement of goods around the world has brought more people out of poverty than anything in history. And I just can't imagine a world. It's also a key enabler of global peace, I think. This interconnectivity of countries and economies sort of puts deterrents in place that are greater than simple political deterrents. And so I do see globalization continuing. I think there's a moment where there's a lot of sense of fear from what has been a lack of availability and all the challenges in the supply chain. But as soon as that passes, that memory is typically very short, and things go back to what's the lowest cost, highest quality, fastest path for delivery. And I think globalization is going to be a part of that for the foreseeable future.
Of course you would think this way. You were at Amazon. A lot of people here might not know, but over the past 20 years, you created this powerhouse of logistics at Amazon, and you made it possible for people to get whatever they wanted wherever in the world and delivered with speed. But now you've left Amazon, and 2 months ago you joined Flexport as its CEO. So tell us a little bit, number one, what is Flexport for those who don't know, and do you see what kind of innovations are you going to bring to this new job?
I'm at Flexport now, and Flexport's a supply chain technology and freight forwarder. So our job is all about making it easy to move goods around the world. So all about enabling globalization for small and medium-sized businesses and enterprises around the world to get their goods from wherever they're manufactured to the customer door or store using technology-enabled products.
Like a mini Amazon.
Well, you can think of it as like a supply chain for everybody else. A lot of companies simply don't have. Most companies aren't able to invest in the technology they need to run the kind of global supply chain that large enterprises can, whether it be an Amazon or General Motors or Walmart or you name it. And so they lack the ability to achieve delivery speeds, costs, and quality that the big players can provide. And our technology is a way to enable them in their growth for the future. And so we think being able to unlock capacity for entrepreneurs and help the environment in the process is a big opportunity for the business and for our customers.
Well, Hamid, you've been a big innovator in this space at all. And interestingly, you were an early investor in Flexport a couple of years ago. First of all, what attracted you to Flexport back then, and what kind of innovations are you visualizing, not only from Flexport, but from other businesses? Where are the opportunities?
Sure. If I can go back to the last question, because there's a really important issue I wanted to bring up, that without globalization, inflation would be a lot higher. Just let's remember that, because we're so focused on inflation these days. But what we liked about Flexport is that it was taking an existing industry which worked with fax machines and messages back and forth and phone calls and all that, and basically digitized it. Mm-hmm. And so made it much more efficient. So now you have pools of supply, pools of demand from shippers, and these guys are sitting in the hub of all the information and making it happen. So that was a really attractive proposition in 2016. There were a few companies actually that had that vision, but we did our due diligence and decided that Flexport was the one that we're going to put our money in, and really glad we did, and glad that Dave is now running it, so it's in good hands.
But from a logistics perspective and everything we've been talking about, the gridlock that's going on in the supply chain, what kind of innovations do you see in logistics over the next couple of years?
So I think that digitization of information is huge. It was a decade ago when somebody shipped something to you, you had no idea where it was in the supply chain, right? But today you can't live without that. You have total visibility in the supply chain. And so this technology, Flexport, basically connects all the people that own assets and transportation assets and the like, together with all the people that have needs to transport goods in a much more real-time basis, so you can do it more economically, faster, and with much better visibility as to where things are. It's not really as important to get things there tomorrow as it is to know where the good is so you can get it to where it needs to go on time. So time definite is much more important than immediate, and that's what they're enabling.
Dave, how do you picture supply chain 2.0? I mean, what are the kinds of opportunities for transforming the supply chain architecture?
Well, I think this digitization is a big
Right.
part of that, which I think then connects to automation. I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of automation on not just information flows and processing on things like customs, but you're going to see a lot of automation in the form of robotics in ports and in facilities and manufacturing. And there's some people going to talk about that later today, I think. But that automation is going to be a huge key to supply chains of the future. And then consolidation. There are so many people moving goods around the world that aren't able to fill a full container or aren't able to achieve basically container maximization. So as ships run not full and as containers run partially full, that's incredibly bad for the environment in terms of how much fuel is wasted transporting air instead of product. And I think that's a place where technology companies can help bring together freight to consolidate and take energy out of the system.
I wonder to what extent that you can get that kind of automation and free-flowing with inventories, because that's been one of the big pain points in the supply chain. You remember during the pandemic, many companies were saying that, I have too much of the wrong stuff, and now they're saying I don't have enough of the right stuff. I mean, is there a way to build in some agility into the supply chain?
Well, I think it's agility and predictability. Predictability really allows you to be much more planful about how much inventory you need. Mm-hmm. Speed enables you to take inventory out. So if we can do both, if you can imagine what would happen to the world if you were able to take 2 days of working capital out of the entire world's inventory. If you could take every store, every good, every material, and make 2 days less of it, it's trillions of dollars worth of dollars into the system, and the amount of carbon that you prevent being released is enormous as well.
Mm-hmm. What are you finding now with the economy slowing down? We see like consumer spending and a lot of business spending slowing down as well. So you assume that there's not going to be as much of an inventory buildup. How do you see this economic phase that we're in impacting supply chain, logistics, inventories, all of that?
Well, I'll give you my theory. I think Dave is absolutely right. Everybody's trying to take slack out of the supply chain because of the capital efficiency that comes with that. But that's really hard to do when, Shanghai shuts down for 3 months, or we have a pandemic that totally changes demand patterns. People are sitting at home, consuming a lot more products, doing fewer experiences, spending all their money on goods, so more goods have to get transported, but nothing is being made at the other end of the pipeline. So you have this dichotomy of efficiency of capital and environmental impact and all that, and then you have the reality of getting stuff to people when they need it and where they need it. There are only 2 answers to that question. One is more technology and information and visibility, and the other is just carrying more inventory in different spots along the chain. The last 20 years have been about the efficiency side. But starting about 2 to 3 years ago, people are realizing that they just have squeezed inventories too tight, and they're losing sales. And losing a unit of sales more than wipes out 10 units of efficiency. So I think the world is going to go to carrying more inventory. We figure about 10% to deal with all these disruptions. And the disruptions can happen on the demand side, like COVID, or they can happen on the supply side. You get a container ship sideways in the Suez Canal for a week, and things don't work the way engineers have planned them.
Mm-hmm. I want to get your take, both of you, on the economic situation and to what extent this is going to impact, the next couple of years. There's a lot of forecasts for a long recession. Hamid, you have been in business for 40 years with Prologis, so you've been through a lot of up business cycles. You've been through down business cycles. You told me that Prologis has done very well in the down cycles, and actually you've increased your market share, but it just seems like what we're going through right now is a lot of it is going to be about leadership of who's going to do well and who doesn't. So Hamid, start with us and tell us what do you think it takes to succeed in a down business cycle like what we're going through now?
I think clarity of vision and communication are key, because people, if you look at the workforce, I would guess a third of the people working in our companies have not seen a recession. It's been straight up. By the way, this is going to be a different kind of recession. I don't know too many recessions where we went into it with a sub 4% unemployment rate, but let's put that one aside. I think the probability and depth of a recession, unless the Fed really gets out of control, is going to be more muted than a lot of the downturns that we've had recently. But you got to be decisive. You got to be very transparent with your people. You got to tell them the truth, and then you got to tell them what you're planning to do about it and how you make lemonade out of the lemons that you're being handed. So people focus too much on cost cutting and adjusting the size of their business and all that to the realities of marketplace, while losing sight as to how you're going to compete when you come out the other end. Because the foundation you build during the downtime is exactly what's going to propel you in the good times.
Well, I mean, Dave, you probably are thinking about this every day, because here you started at this new company 8 weeks ago. You have big growth plans. You plan to hire a lot of people. You're looking for top engineers. Any thought like, maybe we should moderate our pace and to see what happens?
Well, it feels very familiar to me. I started at Amazon in May of '99 on a Friday that was basically the peak stock price for Amazon right before the dot-bomb. So basically went from like whatever it was, $180 to $7 right after I started. So I've seen this movie of before a couple times, and just as you said, I think this idea of staying focused on the customer, continuing to build for the long term, continuing to invest in the things that are important. For us, it's engineering and technology, and we're going to still going to double the size of our engineering team over the next year because we're going to invest into the cycle. But you get very crisp on what's important to you. That's the thing I've learned over the years, is you really have to focus on the thing that is most important to the customer and most important to future growth, so that when you come out the other side, you're ready to take sort of outsized share of whatever the new world is going to be when you come up the other end. And for us, that's a big technology investment over the next year or two.
Same for you, Hamid. I mean, you said you pick up market share in a down cycle.
Ours is a little bit different. We're less technologically dependent as an information business, ultimately, which is what Dave is in. He's going to get it really great, because all these masters of the universe that we're hiring, all the engineers promising the moon, are going to be trying to stay in business. So I think the supply of quality engineering talent is going to go up, and real companies will be a beneficiary of that. In our case, the equivalent is a balance sheet. We've worked very hard over the years to build the best balance sheet in the business. And that investment capacity and our cost structure allow us to not only get through a recession, if there is one, even a deep one, but also have the powder to come out of it on the other end. Usually in our business, there is a lot of capital and few opportunities, or a lot of opportunities and little capital. The trick to success is to get these two to sync up.
What keeps you up at night going through all of this, but the economy, the supply chain, conflicts, and all of that? Both of you.
I don't know. Not too much around business. Like I said, this environment is a little different than the other downturns. I stayed up at night a lot more during the global financial crisis and the S&L crisis that really affected the real estate industry and all that. Probably most people in the room don't even remember that. This one, to me, doesn't feel quite that way. And what, if anything, keeps me up at night is the excitement of our being able to navigate this very successfully. It's not worry, it's just enthusiasm for what's going to happen. At my age, I don't have a problem sleeping in. So I get up at 5 in the morning and I'm ready to go, because there's so much to do.
Yeah, my kids make sure I don't get to sleep in. So
right. I've been there.
I'm kind of in the same place. I'm viewing this as a very opportunistic downturn, in the sense that...
An optimistic downturn.
Yeah, it's opportunistic for our company, because we're sitting in a place, we have a great balance sheet as well right now, and it's an opportunity to go hire big technical talent and bring people in and build the products that customers are going to want as we come out of this, and customers are going to need. I also kind of have the same general view this is going to be a little softer and shorter, perhaps, than some of the naysayers in the world. But there's plenty of stuff happening. There's always something, new crisis in the world, and that's what running supply chain is all about.
We have about 5 minutes to still talk, and I want to talk to both of you about a different way of thinking about the supply chain. You've been very concerned, Dave, about the supply chain and its social impact, especially situations where you're dealing with disaster relief efforts. What concerns you there on the social impact side?
Well, I think it's a couple fronts. One's an opportunity, and one's a risk and a big piece we need to tackle. And part of it's investing in disaster recovery, so helping support Ukraine. We've sent tens of millions of dollars worth of goods to the Ukraine, helping after big natural disasters and events. Supply chain really has the ability to unlock and restore people's lives after these kinds of events. And one of the things we're committed to as a company is trying to help resolve those issues, help solve those problems, and partner with governments and entities to resolve that. And the other is all about the environment. While ocean shipping is a relatively small single-digit piece of total global warming or carbon production, for supply chains and businesses, the movement of their goods from end to end represents a substantive piece of many of their carbon footprints. And we think through consolidation, through partnership with carriers and partnerships with manufacturers, we can find ways to drive up utilization of containers, drive up utilization of ships, help provide visibility. We produce visibility tools for carbon tracking for people in their shipments. We can help drive down the carbon usage across the movement of goods piece of the supply chain. And it's a big piece of what we're committed to taking on in the years ahead.
I just want to follow up on what you were saying, that you've been active with Ukraine, sending money. Anything else?
Lots of goods. So we're mostly it's not sending money. We're investing in sending goods. So where there's a need, we find out what the need is. We find somebody who's a partner with that and help get the goods moved from wherever they're at to the Ukraine.
So here's a case where it's a humanitarian solution in the supply chain to help people. Exactly.
And I think that's where, I know this happens across all kinds of different companies, but it's a place where we're really committed to help matching, the goods with the needs and making those things happen.
That's just great. Hamid, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, being prepared is the first thing, because disasters happen and you can't figure out what you're going to do or what your strategy is when it happens, when you're in the middle of that. So preparation is really key. We take 3 different approaches to dealing with this problem. One, for years we've had a program called Space for Good, because at any given time in a normal market, which we're not in, we're in a very super tight market, but there's 4 or 5% vacancy in our system. Today, there's only 2% vacancy. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, 2% of 1.2 billion square feet is a lot of space. So that space we make available for good. So for logistics support, for other purposes, like when the COVID thing happened, all the mobilization of PPE and the like, or distribution of vaccines, actually. The Pfizer vaccines happened out of our facility in the Chicago area and all that. So one is by making our space available to people. Secondly, we've really overfunded the Prologis Foundation as a way of leveraging our people's time and energy in terms of doing good in their communities. And right now, for example, we're not in Ukraine, but in Poland, there's been a surge of people coming in over the border, and there are many of our employees that are housing total strangers in their homes and all that and taking care of them. So we really encourage that sort of thing with resources and the like. And thirdly, we try to ingrain this into the DNA of the company. We have something called an Impact Day that we've had for over a decade, where everybody in the company, starting with Singapore and ending in wherever the furthest east is, stops one day of the year and basically focuses on projects that they select for themselves as a way of really giving back to the community. But like Dave said, that's only one aspect of it. The other aspect is environmental impact, and I won't say too much about that because we have another panel coming up on the topic, but that's really important because between real estate and transportation, that's almost 60% of greenhouse gases. So we're in areas where some improvements can make a huge impact.
Well, at least we've ended on a very upbeat note, and hopefully all this crisis talk will end pretty soon. Thank you so much, Hamid. Thank you, Dave. And as you said, we're going to be talking about sustainability and other social issues a little later on today. So let's hand everything back to Tracy.
Thanks.